so you don't have to go through full screen is probably good. Okay, the talk can officially begin now that we have our corporate sponsor present. Okay, so this talk's called 10 Years Live on the Infinite Blockchain. I've said that before. So my idea partially for this talk was to, rather than to constantly reference or quote, I'm going to try to do as little quoting and referencing as possible, but rather just give credit up top of the lecture to thinkers and people who inspired me and ideas that I draw from. So, and then, ancestors in, I guess, an ideal lineage. So, I mean, Paul Virilio, George Lewis, Mackenzie Wark, I would say are three people who I took a lot of inspiration from, and in their readings helped me solidify a lot of the ideas that I'm going to present here today. So the first idea actually comes directly from a lecture by George Lewis, and George Lewis was trombone player and software engineer who was part of the AACM advancement for the Association for the Advancement for Creative Musicians, an all-black group of creative musicians. And so he was also an incredible software designer, and he gave a talk about some instruments he had built, and he said that technologies express the concerns and the values of the cultures who create them. So he said, when I went to create my software, I wanted it was to be something that could improvise with others because that was an expression of my culture. And that's the same reason that current day AI software for facial recognition often recognizes people with darker skin, black people, as criminals. Well, with what's been termed algorithmic policing, which I don't think is the best term, but so he sort of sets that up as two examples of how culture gets expressed through technology. So I'm going to talk about AI a little later, but I first wanted to talk about blockchain, which in my mind I want to complicate that it is in fact a technology. I don't really think it is. I think it's more of like a talisman, actually. It's something that gets imbued and possesses values and ideas of a particular group, and that group is the extreme right wing globally, really. So I'm going to move this back so I can see my computer. Okay, so start with a little thing I wrote. The right wing's append-only database come meeting place is a collage of past digital strategies and ideas. Similarly, their political ideology is a melange of reactionary thought through history. Oozed and coagulated together in the 21st century, this extreme right wing is neither an alternative to its political predecessor. It is now the standard mode of reactionary thought, nor a new perspective. The mentality that has emerged is a reconfiguration and edit of the prior 100 years of repressive ideology. So I'm positing two things in this talk. Essentially that blockchain, or in this first part of the talk, essentially that blockchain is less of a technology, not really a technology, and I'll argue that later, but is a talisman or something, I like a talisman, an aesthetic, an amulet. Metaphors abound, but I like to stick with talisman. That's really what I've landed on, I think represents it best, is a talisman that holds in an almost magical way the values of the extreme right wing. Okay, so what are the values of the extreme right wing, and how does blockchain do that, and why does it do that? Okay, so firstly, the values of the extreme right wing, as I just said, is a melange of reactionary thought from the past 100 years. In the United States and, increasingly in Europe, it's called the alt-right, but I wanted to stray away from that term because it's no longer the alternative. Donald Trump is a member of the alt-right, and he, almost won the last election and won the election before that. He's extremely popular. And also, as continually we're told, the center of right-wing, where the right wing is going globally. So what is it an alternative to? It can't be an alternative. So I think part of the reason we're sold on this term alt-right or alternative right is so that we, believe that it's something different, it's less threatening than it is, that the right wing isn't as extreme as it is. So because of the collage nature of this new right wing, it takes ideas from feudalism, ideas of oligarchy, as perennialism, which is, I'm not trying to say perennialism is 100% reactionary, but it has a reactionary history. It takes these ideas and mixes them up as sort of a song would sample from different other songs. This new right wing, which is not actually new, takes old things, mixes them together, and creates something that looks kind of new, sounds kind of new. So for ease, I've termed this the remix right, or I'll refer to it continually as the rewrite. Okay, so we're mostly familiar with the rewrite. If I call it the alt-right, we're familiar with those values, but I want to drill down a little harder on what exactly those values are, because I think they're a little bit of a moving target. Figures in the alt-right are Donald Trump, or the rewrite. We have people, Joe Rogan, Jordan Peterson, Donald Trump, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and these people think different things about different topics. So I want to drill down into what the commonality they have there, so that and really what their values are, so that when I say, okay, blockchain's expressing these values, there's a congruence there, or, they're the same values. Okay, so the rewrite, I would say, I think you've seen the rewrite. They have no past loyalty to previous social conventions, so they're not totally reactionary in that way, in that they want to go to the past, such as monogamy. So they don't have loyalty to monogamy, homosexuality, male rule, not getting abortions. They're ready to abandon these things. But what they do have is a hatred for new social orders. So multi-parent or single-parent families, queerness, feminism, like doing whatever you need to do for getting an abortion. So they don't want to make abortions illegal, but they do want to, imprison people who would try to seek to get an abortion. Peter Thiel himself is a gay man, but he has no problem, backing all of Florida's and, national bills against transness. So it's they can leave old things behind, but they're not ready to embrace the new. Which goes on to say there's a real hatred of multiplicity and a love of homogeneity. So they want to be around people who look like them. They want to be around, people who think like them. There's, sort of the podcast economic sphere is just filled with like white men talking to white men. Sometimes there's a white woman and they just sort of echo the same bullshit back and forth at each other and land on the fact that, COVID isn't a problem, or, often they land on you should invest in cryptocurrency, but, there's a huge problem with transness, or police violence is, black people's fault. Not bullshit, because it's these same, for a lot of reasons, but it's usually people of very similar demographics talking to each other. Okay, but what they really prize most, and I think what's most central, is the idea that capital and really power, and power through capital, and I'll take an addendum here, because remember I said that they weave together oligarchy and feudalism. So there's sort of like power can operate through capital, but it also, can just operate through like might or violence, and as, you could argue that what made the ruling class in feudalism was capitalism, but I'm just saying they're not strictly bound to capital. What they're bound to is power, and they want to accumulate it, and they think only their group should accumulate it. It should just rest on them, essentially. So, who should have power? The people who already have power. That's, I would say, the maximum totem of this rewrite. And they should be unfettered to get as much power as they want and much capital as they want too. So an example I came up with, so to that, this rewrite can stand being middle class or petite bourgeoisie as long as there's a lower class. So I think they take a lot of inspiration from the dynamic of the yeoman farmer in late 1800s American South. I'm always forgetting the name of this author in this essay, but I love it. But Barbara J. Fields and Karen J. Fields Karen Fields, they're sisters, they don't have the same middle name. Have an amazing essay called Racecraft and wrote a whole book on that, which talks about how race itself globally actually sort of develops about this dynamic. The ruling class in the late 1800s South essentially sort of manufactured race to convince the white lower class that they had someone they were above. So that same dynamic, I think, is appearing in the rewrite. They just want to feel like they can shit on someone. And on top of that, they want to feel, even if it's not possible, as though they can become the top of the chain. They can be the one who's shitting on everyone. They can become Peter Thiel, Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, who are all, great heroes of the rewrite. Okay, so blockchain isn't a technology because it has no new ideas and no uses. It is a symbol, an aesthetic, an amulet, a talisman. Digital technology, scrolled too much. Digital technologies exist in a near, perhaps actually impossible space to discuss. They are inherently abstract without physical representation, and their existence is determined by the instructions to assemble themselves for a user's desires. A piece of software, an image file, a database don't so much exist as the descriptions for how a computer can manifest them exist. These difficulties lead to a painful heuristic for discussing digital technology, the metaphor. A file is the metaphor chosen by the developers of the Unix operating system to explain the separation between what occupies different chunks of memory. Of course, memory is also a metaphor for the state of logic circuits in different parts of the hardware of a computer. So what I'm trying to say here is that when you're discussing digital technologies, you have to go into metaphor. There's no literalism with digital technologies. We all know what memory is. We all, on a computer, we're all like, how much memory does we were talking about the SD card earlier. How much memory is on the SD card? Memory is just sort of how the electricity is flowing through the circuits at the given time. And that sounds maybe wonky or hand-wavy, but it's the truth. We're sort of reliant on metaphors. So what becomes difficult about ever discussing technology is that you're always a little bit abstracted through metaphor. So I'd like to describe how blockchain works, so I can describe how it's an amulet for the rewrite. But I want to asterisk that with the fact that I'll be using metaphor. So. Mouth is very dry. Am I talking too quickly? No? Okay. Great. Okay, so blockchain, I said earlier, blockchain amulet cum database. Really, it's a database. It stores data. That's what it does. What makes it different from a SQL database or Mongo database, which are the three main types of digital databases, I would say, those two, and then there's blockchain, is that it's distributed, has to be distributed, and arguably sort of has to be decentralized. Now, again, I'm going to put a little asterisk next to that because there are private blockchains that aren't decentralized, and also decentralized is not at all well defined. So it's a little bit difficult to totally land on. But essentially from a technical level, what happens in a blockchain is that blockchain database is what it's meant to do. So first of all, its usage, it always is working in transactions. It's always one user doing something with another user. So it can't store, it actually can't store because you need two inputs from two different users. So it's always stores transactions between one user. So I give someone X amount of Bitcoin. That's a transaction, So, okay, so it stores that transaction. And then after some certain amount of transactions have occurred, And it stores it in, I would argue, not that special of a way, but using some fun cryptographic hash stuff, which is not super relevant, but I'll get into later. So it stores that transaction, and then after enough transactions has occurred, in the case of Bitcoin, what's called the Bitcoin core, but some basically software that is working with the blockchain, will bundle those transactions together, which again, so bundle, that's just a metaphor. Like, it allocates some space for them together. That's the metaphor I'm choosing to use. I mean, I should also say, as in a sort of meta point of this talk, is that I'm trying to not use the same conventions that blockchain people or even big tech people use. They often try to use a lot of metaphors and not point to the fact that they're using metaphors. They're sort of saying these things exist physically. This is the truth. It bundles them. You know, we hear all the time about AI thinking. You know, we hear about blockchain. It agrees. It comes to an agreement. You know, it doesn't. That's a metaphor. It's always a metaphor. It's a piece of electronics. So bundling is the metaphor I'm using right now. So it bundles together these transactions into what's termed a block. I'm going to use the term row because it's a database. You have rows in a database. Makes a lot more sense in my opinion. There's reasons that they use the term block, and I'm not totally. I don't think it's the worst term, but I prefer row. So in the Bitcoin white paper, it calls them blocks, so I understand why. Okay, so it says, okay, we're going to take this block and we're going to add it to the blockchain. But there's an issue there because anyone could submit blocks to be added to the blockchain. So I could submit a block that says the largest holder of Bitcoin has given all their Bitcoin to me. This would be a problem because it would, you know, you could steal Bitcoin. So you need something to, they call it validate, which I think is a good term. You need something to say this exchange was okay. I'll get more to how validation works, and it's called a consensus algorithm, how those work later, because that's, I would say, the most crucial thing to blockchain, and the only thing novel about blockchain. It's the only thing sort of new that it does, even though consensus algorithms exist in distributed networks for 30 years. No, longer than 30. It's 2023. Holy shit. Yeah, 35 years. So, but it's important. Okay, so anyways, they say, okay, let's say someone validates this block. We say it's totally fine. It gets added to the blockchain. But again, remember that the database is distributed, which means that there's different versions of the database that live on machines all over the world. So, you know, it's as if I made a drawing and passed it around this room. Everyone made their own version of the drawing. You know, it's sort of like a giant game of telephone, essentially. And so you need to tell all of those machines, oh, this block's been added. There's a new version of the blockchain. We need to update it. So that's what happens. It basically talks to every server in the world that's hosting blockchain and says you need to update it, and they do so, because if they try to update an old version of the blockchain, no good. It will not be validated, and so you can't add it to the blockchain. Okay, so we have a little bit about how blockchain works. It's actually a lot about how blockchain works. That's like most of the idea. It's a funny thing in the blockchain community. They're really proud of how simple it is. They're like, it's so simple. It's like, it's almost so simple that it just doesn't do anything. You know what I mean? I can come, you know, it's, anyways. Okay. So why isn't it a technology? Well, okay, so the Bitcoin white paper talks about there being no central authority for a blockchain. That's something central to, and the Bitcoin white paper introduces the idea of a blockchain. So there should be no central authority. When these blocks need to get validated, there should be nothing that says, there should be, you know, nothing like in, you know, the US Mint or something that says these dollars are okay, or I don't, you know, whatever. There's like the city says, you know, this is the name of the street. If I decide to name this street Ben Street, a central authority comes and says that's not allowed. Okay, so that shouldn't exist in blockchain. Fine. So that idea somehow greatly inspired the blockchain community. The blockchain community became extremely invigorated by this idea. Now, nearly all the literature on blockchain talks about decentralization. They're extremely into this idea that blockchain is decentralized. So I want to make two arguments, and they're not really fair arguments, because first of all, I want to say that it's not decentralized, and then I want to say that decentralization is not at all well defined by anyone. So it's not really fair. I'm not defining it, and then I'm saying it's not decentralized, but bear with me. So some of the few examples I want to point to and instances that I find that are evidence of lack of decentralization, or evidence of centralization, to put it in the positive, is majorly, I think, Amazon Web Services. So if you're not familiar, Amazon has one part of their business is called Amazon Web Services, and basically they rent out server space and provide a lot of services for any kind of digital hosting or hosting on the internet or the World Wide Web that you might want to do. So they have recently, last 5 years, I think, came out with a blockchain service. So you can host your blockchain on Amazon. Lots and lots of blockchains are hosted there. It makes hosting a blockchain a lot easier. And so part of this is they have a direct alliance, I guess, with the Ethereum blockchain. So you can do direct transactions with the Ethereum blockchain through Amazon. So, according to websites that are meant to monitor the work of Ethereum nodes, today, actually I checked today, 70% of transactions on the Ethereum blockchain are done from, 70% of the Ethereum blockchain is held on Amazon servers. So that's not really decentralized. That's just one blockchain. That's just Ethereum, but still the same thing. Amazon is making lots and lots of money off blockchain. Secondly, in the case of NFTs, which is an application of the blockchain, NFT, or there has to be a file that goes with an NFT, an image, a sound file, whatever file, doesn't matter. Some sort of file that holds some form of classic media. Peace, thank you. Okay, so blockchains they're expensive to power, and it's hard to host a file on them. It's much easier to just host a file on a traditional server. So a lot of NFTs, rather than actually being the real file hosted on a blockchain, it'll just be a link to a server that hosts that file. And by far, the largest hosting for files is Amazon, and then close second is Google. So Amazon's really raking it in on the blockchain, and Google is also making a lot. So these are some ways that it's centralized. I think the most obvious example of centralization is that no one fucking buys crypto not through an exchange. Exchanges are the main way people do it. So between Coinbase, Crypto.com, and Robinhood, that represents, they're private companies. Again, they're centralized. They don't have to tell us how much crypto buying and selling is going through them. They don't. And, it's very, very hard to monitor this kind of thing because the amount of transactions is really large. So, some people have tried and there's estimates, whatever. But, most interactions with blockchain are done through that. That's a centralized power. If Robinhood, for example, whatever, said you couldn't buy that meme stock, GameStop. They could do a similar thing with crypto. They could just say no one can buy crypto now, and then that would sink the crypto market. Because if all three of them came together and said we don't want people to buy crypto on this day, they could effectively stop crypto movement. So that's centralized power. Okay, so those, are a few examples with the problems on those are non-technical. They're just sort of practical. They're how they once this technology goes out into the world, how they actually manifest, which I think is an important part of technology. I don't think technology exists in a vacuum. If something promises, quote, decentralization, and then in practice it can't give it, that's sort of a failure of the technology. You can can promise anything hypothetically, but if it can't work in the real world, then it's not worth a lot. Or that says something about the technology itself, I think, or the technology's interaction with society, which is ultimately the important part. Okay, so the second part of that argument is that decentralization isn't well defined. No one says what they mean by decentralization. Okay, so again, this is somewhat of a, I don't know, if you're not super well versed in this thing or you're not working on the internet in the world of servers a lot, it's maybe a little confusing, but the database has to be distributed. A blockchain has to be distributed. It has to live on many, many different machines. Different versions of it have to live on many, many different machines across the world. That's central to a blockchain. That's something inherent in blockchain technology. Okay, so to achieve decentralization, how much of the server has to be divided? Like if 51, so I mean, it sort of says 51% is this like number. People talk about 51% attacks where someone can take control of a blockchain if they control 51% of the blockchain. But does 49% make it distributed? Is it or decentralized? Is it decentralized when 50% of the when 50% of nodes are, if 50% of the blockchain is controlled by one person, is that still decentralized? 70% of the Ethereum blockchain is on Amazon, is effectively controlled by one entity, Amazon. So no one ever says, there's nothing that defines decentrality. And there's nothing that describes centrality. So, like people go, Google controls this. Google's at the center of it. It was like, but there's no, of whatever email, email to me is not super centralized. It's a protocol that's used across a lot of different services, and something like Proton Mail, for instance, shows that you don't have to use a big tech corporation to perform emails. But they would also, a blockchain person would be like, that's centralized. This is a decentralized network. But there's no definition. So if there's no definition, then I don't, there's no way to say whether that's true or not, and that's certainly non-technical. When you give a technical document, you can't describe part of it in a way that has no definition. You have to describe things very strictly. Okay. So far I've mostly been using the term blockchain, but I'll use the terms blockchain, cryptocurrency, and Web3 pretty much interchangeably. That's another attempt to work outside of the paradigms that I think the blockchain community has set up. Cryptocurrency was sort of malignant and whatever, horrible people. Its biggest people exponents are, Peter Thiel, who spoke at the Bitcoin conference last year, was the keynote speaker at the Bitcoin conference. Joe Rogan, Elon Musk is, I would say, one of the biggest crypto people in the world. People who espouse really vile things. So sort of to move away from cryptocurrency it's not about cryptocurrency, it's about blockchain. Well, what's a blockchain? It's a decentralized database. Well, what's decentralized? Well, we don't have a good definition for that. Okay, well, so what do you do with a blockchain? Well, you can move around coins through transactions. You mean cryptocurrency? I guess so. Like, it just all is just a Mobius strip of the same terms being recycled into garbage until meaning is impossible to grasp, and which is the point. If you can't point to something, you can't say this is central, then it's very hard to criticize. You can always move your argument. And then finally, there's the most amorphous of terms, Web3, which is, Web3 is it's almost messianic in its description. It's this point that'll come at some time in the future, and it'll change the internet and change the World Wide Web, and we'll have decentrality, but except that the metaverse is Web3, and everything will link to the metaverse, which is controlled by this company Meta, which is like the biggest tech company in the world. So it's and when is this going to happen? So but if you can talk about that and just say, well, what we're doing works in Web3, it's hard to say, well, wait, so you're like in line with Mark Zuckerberg? No, no, it's we're doing something different. You're never being required to defend what you're actually saying, which is, as we learned, I think, through the Donald Trump presidency, really, and sort of the post-truth era, as some have termed it, that like if you're always saying different things and never defining what you're saying, never saying something clear, it's really easy to trick people, and it's really easy to never be held accountable, which is the blockchain community would hate to be held accountable. That would be the worst thing, if you went to the blockchain community and said, you got a lot of money for free. It's like a lot of people suffer. You want to give some of your millions to COVID relief or essential workers. You got it all for free. It seems only right. They would say, no, I earned this money. So I'm going to use those terms interchangeably as an attempt to change the way I think about them. Okay, so the odd thing, though, however, is the Bitcoin white paper also never talks about cryptocurrency, or never says currency. It talks about coins, which I think makes sense. Like a coin doesn't have to necessarily be a monetary coin. It essentially describes a system in which transactions occur and in which coins are traded. So maybe works for a game. I don't know. It doesn't really have a good application, I don't think, but it doesn't have to be currency. The term cryptocurrency emerges after the Bitcoin white paper, and it emerges after Bitcoin is fairly popular. So it's a weird term. That's also they weren't like, we're trying to make this currency, whoever made Bitcoin was not like, oh, we're trying to make a currency. That came later. The community that grew around it said, this is great. Bitcoin, we can use it as a currency. It'll be a currency of the future. So I said I wasn't going to quote too much. By the way, I wasn't going to quote too much, but I'm not an economist, and economics is a little hard for me. But I've read, some stuff that I find convincing. So this is from his first name is Nuriel. Is an economist at NYU who's a Bitcoin skeptic. But for something to meet the definition of what money actually it is, has to have several characteristics. It has to be a unit of account and a single numeraire for all transactions. Second, it has to be widely used means of payment that can be scalable for many transactions. Third, it has to be a stable store of value in terms of being a store of wealth and of purchasing power over goods and services. Now, if you look at Bitcoin or hundreds of other cryptocurrencies, they're not units of account. There are no goods or services that are priced in Bitcoin. Secondly, it's not even a stable numeraire. You have this cacophony since you have thousands of cryptocurrencies. There's no way you can use any of them to have a stable numeraire to price all the goods and services in the economy. Indeed, the utopian dream of decentralization of many people in the crypto world, they believe that there should be different cryptocurrency for every good or service out there. That is the equivalent of returning to barter. So it fails the first criterion. Secondly, it fails the criterion of being a means of payment. Bitcoin's own technology does not allow you to do more than 5 transactions per second. Ethereum allows 7 or 8 transactions per second. A standard credit or debit card network allows upwards of 25,000 transactions per second. 3, it's not a stable store of value or purchasing power over goods or services. Suppose you're a merchant and you're accepting, say, Bitcoin for payment. You receive a payment in Bitcoin in the morning, and by the afternoon, the price has fallen 10% or 20%. Your entire profit margin may be wiped out before you've had time to convert your Bitcoins in your own preferred currency, leaving aside the already high transaction costs. Or say you do keep it in Bitcoin, which has gone from 20,000 to 10,000 to 5,000 to 3,000. Where's the stable store of value? Where's the stable purchasing power? People talk about these things as being an alternative to fiat money, but they fail on every dimension of what a currency should be. It's a misnomer, in fact, to call them cryptocurrencies in the first place. They're not currencies by any reasonable definition. So just quickly, to be fair, the Ethereum blockchain now can handle many more transactions. It can handle as many as a credit or debit card. So it fails on only 2 of the 3 definitions of being a currency. But it's still, again, not a currency. So what is it? So cryptocurrencies, they're not currencies. You have blockchains, which are decentralized, but we have absolutely no idea what decentralization means. And besides, they fail on most of the litmus tests for decentralization in the real world. Look only at, also the largest owners and holders of blockchain are very small in percentage. And then look at Coinbase, all the examples I named before. And then Web3 is just like, it's totally non-defined. So then what is it? Again, it's an amulet. It's something that has these values magically imbued into it, and the rewrite looks at it and sees what they want, sees something, and it sees itself in them, and it grows together, and these ideologies grow. The nature of blockchain is in constant flux, never to be understood or defined, never to be held accountable, a perfect hiding place, a perfect amulet for the rewrite. Okay, so Nouriel Roubini was the economist I quoted earlier. Just want to cite my sources. All right, now it's time for the flavor. Okay, so we've gotten to the point finally where what are the values of blockchain, and are they similar to the values of the rewrite? Okay, so firstly, I want to talk about, but this is not the principal values. The principal value I will get to momentarily, and if you've been paying attention, you can guess what it is. The first values I want to talk about are security and personal freedom. I say personal freedom because it's not freedom generally. It's not freedom for everyone. I think I thought a lot about the term freedom for this, and freedom versus liberation. So in my mind, you're liberated from something and you're free to do something. Of course, people will say like, I'm free from whatever. The idea between another difference I sort of worked out in my mind was that freedom will take you out of whatever is subjugating you. Liberation abolishes it, right? So what for the blockchain community, what they want freedom to do is often, a common complaint is they're like, these social media networks don't let me, peddle hate speech and conspiracy theories. I want freedom to do that, which essentially, so they want freedom away from that, and they want, freedom to do whatever they want and, buy guns and, with cryptocurrency or a lot of, sadly, very tragically, there's human trafficking has been done with cryptocurrencies. They want freedom to do those things, which I would argue is not really freedom at all. You can't be, maybe it's freedom, it's not liberation. You can't be liberated to the sense where you can subjugate another person. Liberation inherently abolishes the tools of subjugation. It's not, you can't say, I want to be free to subjugate another person. That there's some sort of oxymoron happening there. Okay, so security and freedom, where did I get those two things? So cryptocurrency, blockchain, loves to talk about cryptography. It premiered on a cryptography message board, was where the Bitcoin white paper was posted. The Bitcoin, so two of its, besides Web3, cryptocurrency is cryptographic currency, cryptocurrency. Blockchain takes its name from a cryptographic strategy called block cipher chaining. Oddly, block cipher chaining is not used anywhere in cryptocurrency at all. I don't know why they chose that name. Because it has to do with block cipher chaining, but it's not used anywhere. It's just sort of a allusion to cryptography. And then secondly, it barely uses cryptography for any sort of functional means. So earlier when I was talking about transactions and how transactions work, so when I say to a user, I'm going to give this other user $20, we each give what's called a public key, our public keys, and those, it says, okay, I have public key from user 1, public key from user 2, and those are both fine. So to prove that I own that public key, I need to have what's called a private key that matches with it in this cryptographic scheme, essentially. It's not that complicated. That's how it works, but there's some complicated implementation details, and why exactly it works is a probability problem. I mean, it does work. It's been proven, but it's not that interesting is what I want to say, or that relevant. The other place you see public and private key interaction is every single website that has a password. So almost every website. That's how, well, yeah. There's public-private key interaction happening on that. You as the user, when you sign in, you're just using a password, but public and private keys are becoming more and more popular. You're not encoding something with public-private key interactions. It's just a usage. Your public key is encoded opposite of decoded, so made into something that's unreadable, is encoded using a cryptographic scheme. Blockchain uses SHA-256. Again, not super important, but so to make the public key, and then of course the private key is also encoded in a similar manner. But these sort of encodings are extremely common. I don't know, Google doesn't, when you log into Google, it encrypts your password to check if you've used the right password. It doesn't, it's not like crypto email or crypto Google account. No one thinks of it as a cryptographic thing, and it works, I would argue, pretty similarly. It maybe works a little more similarly. Public-private key interaction is usually used more by people who are developers, and you want an extra level of make it harder to hack into your stuff. So a little extra level of security. But again, it's not totally cryptography. And I've been using the word cryptography a lot, but I should describe it. Cryptography is the study of secure messaging. So, I would say that it starts, this is awesome. It's the Ides of March, and which is the day Caesar was killed. And cipher, which cryptography is essentially the study of ciphers, comes from Caesar, and cryptography really starts with Caesar. They were sending him a message, the Caesars, where they moved up all the letters some certain amount. So A becomes C in the message, B becomes E, so on and so forth. But that's a very easy cipher to decode. So through the ages, more complicated ciphers evolved. Enigma was the ones the Nazis used, and then Turing broke and was a key part in starting the computing age. But anyways, it's a way to send secure messages. It's when I want to say something that I don't want anyone else to know what I'm saying. That's really what cryptography covers. A good use of that is passwords. I want my passwords to be encrypted. I want cryptography to be involved with my passwords. So anywhere you see a password, you're going to see cryptography, but we don't talk about these things as being reliant on cryptography. They are, but it's not central to what they are. And then public and private key encryption is sort of a slightly more complicated version of this scheme. But it doesn't really use it. But two of its names involve, and it doesn't use cryptography in any meaningful way. A lot of people will like to say, well, you have the block hash, which is a hash is with SHA-256, it is a 256-bit length hash. Essentially, it's a bunch of gibberish. It's like numbers and letters for 256 bits. It's in hex divided by 4. 2 to the 8. Yeah, okay, 2 to the 4th. So it's 2 to the 4th is 64. Okay, so it's 64 letters and numbers in a row. That's the hash. That's what a cryptographic hash looks like. But, and every block is labeled with one of these hashes. But those hashes don't mean anything. If you decode them, they don't say all the Bitcoin is buried here. They don't say anything, actually. They're not meant to be decoded. They're just labels. So, this place has a label 2 East Broadway. That, instead of being labeled 2 East Broadway or my phone number, I'm not going to give that out. But everyone has a phone number that's, instead of, 62 to the 4th, yeah. 64, 2 to the 4th is 64th, right? 64, right? Okay. Sorry. 4, 8. No, it's 2 to the third is 8. It's fucking 16. Why did I think it was 64? Sorry. Anyways, it doesn't matter. Moving on. So whatever, where you have this string, it shouldn't be divided by 4. Anyways, it's 64 characters. So instead of phone numbers are with country code, 3, 6 plus 4, 10, 11, are 11 digits. This is just 64. It's the same thing. It's something that labels something. But instead of being 860-508-7956, my phone number, it would be like AEFB39, on and on and on. It's just used as a label. And if it's just used as a label, then it's not securing a message. In what way is it like, it's not securing anything, it's just used to label it. And also they're public. Everyone can see what the label is for the Bitcoin, for a cryptocurrency hash. Like, that's part of the design of it. And then it tells you a bunch of transaction data. It's every block, and then every transaction is also labeled with these hashes. They're called hashes. So again, circle back around. It doesn't use cryptography, but all of its labeling and marketing involves cryptography. Why? So secure messaging is that's what cryptography is. So because security is something the rewrite loves, and they picked up on this small token of security and moved with it. Okay, so security inherently deals with some form of property. To secure something is, secure etymologically means to be without worry, which that doesn't sound, that doesn't sound like liberation. Like, liberation to me is the freedom and ability to worry about fellow people. Like, I'm liberated to not worry, personally on a spiritual note, like to not worry so much about myself, but worry about other people. That's what I imagine liberation to be, not to be totally without worry. But this is to be without worry. If you secure something, you're tying it down, you're strapping to something. You can secure a person, but anything you secure, you're inherently taking agency away from. You're putting your agency on it. And it's also, one of the most abstract forms of capital is called securities. Which I looked for a while on why it's called that. I couldn't really find much information, but if anyone knows the history of as economic historian, holler. But it's, I'd imagine it's called that because it's backed. You're not, you can put your money in it without fear that it'll crash. It's essentially stable. You can be without worry. So the idea of security, again, is to enforce your will onto something else, to take agency away from that which you're securing, which is, of course, really appealing. So, to the rewrite. So if the rewrite says, what we want is, whatever, I've just been thinking about these, all these trans bills happening, but we're somehow threatened by transness, so we need to make ourselves secure, to be without worry. So we'll make these bills that secure trans people, secure them away from us. That's how repressive tactics work. They are about security. And then, going on with this example, if we can control and secure trans people, then we are free to do, we can't feel free in our, whatever it is they feel free. I don't pretend to understand why this is such a threat to them. Then we can feel free if we have security. Mostly can feel free to pursue capital and power, without oversight or accountability. Okay, and so the principal value, again, that I just touched on of the rewrite is a desire and the ability to have unfettered access to power. And, if that power comes through capital, which arguably all power does, that's great. That's the best way. That's what they always want. They want others not have to have access to power and them to have unfettered access, right? Okay, so how does that manifest in blockchain? So this is really what interests me most about blockchain technology through exploring it. So cryptography, not that big of a part of it, does some certain cryptographic parts. Decentralization, not even talked about in the Bitcoin white paper. Sometimes people will say immutability, but there's a whole other thing about that. What the Bitcoin white paper really is getting at and what it says is core to this technology is the consensus algorithms that I talked about earlier. So essentially that no central authority is saying this transaction is okay, that it's decided by these consensus algorithms. So there's two things I need to clear up about that. There's a lot of I really am trying in this talk to not be like a lot of people say, but I'm saying. But I've read a lot, and it's really a problem with blockchain reporting, and I think it's really a problem, is that a lot of people will say, and it's written in the blockchain white paper this way, so I think people pick it up from there, is that then a user validates the block. So a user says this transaction is okay. But that's not actually what happens, and it doesn't happen because that doesn't make any fucking sense. So if I said, okay, I'm going to put in a transaction that says the largest holder of Bitcoin gives all their Bitcoin to me, and then I say to anyone in this audience who is also working with Bitcoin, I'll give you 10% of my heist if when you're asked to validate this transaction, you say okay. You say that it's okay. So that's the perfect heist. It's very easy. So the way the person who the user gets to validate the transaction is chosen is the actual consensus algorithm part, which I'll get to in a moment. But still, even if it wasn't chosen, even if my partner in this crime isn't chosen to validate the block, I could just keep doing that until they are chosen. There's no central authority to say, bad, stop trying to steal blockchain. I could just do it till it's stolen. Why hasn't that happened yet? Because that's not how it fucking works. And it's like, I get a little upset because it is actually insane that there's like this massive like lie that goes around. So anyways, how does it work? So in Bitcoin, there's something called the Bitcoin core, which, oh, by the way, on the subject of decentralization, the Bitcoin core is managed. The people who can decide if an update should go into the Bitcoin core, I haven't even said what the Bitcoin core is. The Bitcoin core is the underlying software that makes sure that the Bitcoin blockchain stays valid and its integrity is still good. That's the right version on every machine. I looked today at the, it's called a repository of code for the Bitcoin core. There's 28 people who decide if there's a change. So there's millions of people doing Bitcoin transactions. If someone wants to make a change to the underlying software, there's 28 people who get to decide. So that seems like centralized power to me. And then like a lot of those people work at the MIT Digital Currency Lab. Digital Currency Initiative is what it's called. Not the majority, but that's a presence in the Bitcoin software community on the software side. So, that I find that to be problematic. Okay, so the Bitcoin core actually looks at the transaction and says, okay, wait a minute. The biggest holder of Bitcoin did not authorize the transaction to Ben to give Ben all the biggest holder of Bitcoin's coin. That didn't happen. And the Bitcoin core says, you can't do that. And I don't know if it's built into the Bitcoin core, but a lot of blockchains will boot you off the system. They'll say, that's bad behavior, bad boy. You have to go now. Which, that seems like centralized authority to me. Also, if you can get booted off for trying to stealing, if they want to have a real decentralized fucking free-for-all, you should be allowed to steal. That's my opinion, not factual, so it doesn't pertain to the talk. But, okay, so then what happens? Now, a user does add that block to the chain, because when you add that block to the chain, you get issued cryptocurrency. This is called mining. A lot of people hear all about mining. We're always talking about mining. Mining. Sorry, they're always talking about mining. They are, but so that's essentially the process of mining. Now, how the user, I want to not say person, say user, gets chosen to get to do that and thus get issued more cryptocurrency. There's two main consensus algorithms. One is called proof of work, which is how Bitcoin works, and then there's one called proof of stake, which is how Ethereum works and why it can do all those transactions, which I mentioned earlier. So the way proof of work works is that essentially you participate in this weird guessing game that for some reason uses cryptography again. It doesn't really need to again. It's basically you have a computer generating numbers in a round robin type thing until one of the computers gets the right number. It's a little more complicated than that, but it's not. I wouldn't say it's that important. What is important is that the ability to do that is given by having lots of computing power. If you have tons of computing power, you'll get chosen more often. So who has tons of computing power? People who own a lot of machines and people who have a lot of access to electricity and money to pay for electricity. So rich people. So who does blockchain decide to reward? The people with a lot of capital. Who should get more capital? The people who already have capital. So that's sounding a lot like the rewrites idea. Who should be in power? The people. Well, why are white men in power? Because they deserve to be in power. Who should have more power? The people who are already in power. That's sort of the philosophy of the rewrite. We want unfettered access to power, that's about as unfettered as it gets. You get rewarded just for being rich. Now, there's also proof of stake, which I had to read over like 100 times because I was like, this is actually insane. Like, you cannot tell me this is how this works. So proof of stake, which is, okay, the other thing I should say about proof of stake. So a lot of people in the blockchain community, a lot of people complain, you have to use a lot of electricity to, quote, mine Bitcoin to go through this process I've described. And then also, you can't do enough transactions with proof of work. You can only do 5 or 6, as that economist stated. So I go, okay, well, we have this new consensus algorithm called proof of stake. And proof of stake is way better for the environment, uses way less computing power, and you could do tons of transactions. No problem, right? Okay, great. How does it work? Well, proof of stake selects a user to be able to add the final block to the chain and be rewarded with crypto, and I'll just say Ethereum because it's how Ethereum works, by who already has the most stake in the blockchain. So who already owns the most cryptocurrency. So you're rewarded with cryptocurrency because you already have a lot of cryptocurrency. So who has the most cryptocurrency? Usually the person who made the blockchain. Who holds the most Ethereum? The people who made Ethereum. So they're constantly rewarded again and again. So what proof of stake posits as a sort of fair economic system or just an economic system in general is, essentially an idea of feudalism. The rich, the lords of the lords, because God has blessed them. Like the rich are they created Ethereum, so they deserve unfettered access to wealth. They should be given more wealth. Which of course these values are like the principal values of the rewrite. We want unfettered access to power and capital. Okay, great. So Donald Trump always is like, I don't pay taxes because I'm smart. The U.S. economic system works similarly. It rewards people who are rich in many, many different ways. Who gets more capital? The people who already have capital. This mimics this system in the extreme. It's an acceleration of the dire state of not dire because it works really well for rich people. They think it's great. I would say the extremely cruel state of American capitalism and global capitalism, really. Which leads me to a second thing. If you don't really need anyone to validate the blocks, why don't you just choose someone randomly? Why don't you the person who gets to validate it is just a random user. So money is distributed randomly and evenly across the system. You could do that. Or you could have a consensus algorithm. Anyone can use this. Anyone in the blockchain community, please make this. Why don't you have proof of ethics where you have a central pot that periodically dispenses cryptocurrency or converts it to US dollars or whatever fiat cash and gives it to people in need, and you can sign up, and every once in a while, it gives it out, and then whoever contributes most to that pot gets to mine the most crypto. That technologically, from a software standpoint, is just as easy to do as proof of stake. It's a little more complicated. You have to do the dispensing stuff, whatever. It's a little more complicated. But it's completely feasible. Why has no one done it? Because this is a right-wing talisman. It's not a technology. It's not meant to benefit anyone except for the rewrite. So they say, okay, what's the solution to our completely wasteful, selfish, insane protocol? We'll have a less wasteful protocol that hoards the money even better for us. We win on 2 counts. People criticize us less, and we have better access to what we really want. I like this quote. So I think it's a good point to put it here. So at the Bitcoin conference last year, the most recent Bitcoin conference, Nico ZM, who's the CEO of Bitvolt Mining, said, "Not only do I think Bitcoin toxicity is important, I think it's absolutely necessary. And if you're against Bitcoin toxicity, you are against Bitcoin. And if you're against Bitcoin, you are against freedom, period." Which I think he really means that. It seems like this kind of like Bush era hyperbolic idea of freedom, but I think in his mind, you are against freedom. You're against his freedom to do whatever he wants. His freedom to subjugate other people based on his own desires or whims. So I think in a way you are against his notion of freedom if you're against Bitcoin, and I'm against Bitcoin. And so, I mean, you could also argue that, well, these, those are just kind of random names, like cryptocurrency and blockchain. They just came up with it. It, could have been something else. And it definitely could have been. They chose to go to cryptography. They said security is our primary idea. We really love the idea of security. Again, they could have called the blockchain, a transaction-driven database, user transaction-driven database. They could have called blocks rows, on and on. They could have called cryptocurrency block currency even, something, but they didn't. They just were it was really central, and I'm not saying to an individual cabal of people, but to the community that grew and grew around blockchain. It was really important for them to always signal this idea of security, to always signal, here you'll be free to do whatever you want. Here you won't deal with people who want you to be accountable. Here you won't deal with people you subjugate, saying, you're subjugating me, stop it. All right, and so I think this idea of right to accumulate capital unfettered without imposition by other people is seen in the most twisted application, which I've talked about briefly, of blockchain, which is the NFT. I'll just talk briefly about it because I'm fascinated by it just from, I'll say it, whatever. I'm fascinated on an ontological level because an NFT has created scarcity without quantity. So, I'm going to read another quote. It's a great book. So this book is from, I believe, the late 60s. A digital picture by its very nature can be saved, transferred, and restored without any loss of information. To make a copy of a digitized image is to make another original. A bit is a bit and is transferred exactly. This means that an artist can save a state of his image, explore new directions in changing that image, perhaps a risky new direction that he was afraid to approach before, and retrieve his saved image to continue it if he did not like the results of that exploration. This means that anyone with a compatible computer system can have the artist's work to do with as he wishes. In fact, the rip-off problem could cause some legal difficulties in the future. So, excuse the sexist prose writing of the time. But essentially what that person is saying is that you don't copy a file, you clone it. it doesn't exist in any sort of literal way. A bit is a bit. If I put a file on your computer that was on my computer, nothing changes about the file I gave you. In fact, they're the exact same thing. It's not a reproduction of my file, it's just a clone of my file. They have the same ontological state in the world. So what the NFT does is just say, no, they don't. There's only 10 of these. Even though they are essentially infinite, we can all see any NFT at any time or listen to any NFT at any time. Whatever form the NFT takes, they're all on public view. We can have them on our computers even. Like I said, a lot of them just point to some sort of storage space somewhere on the web. So you can, they sort of exist really infinitely. They don't have a quantity, but the NFT just somehow magically says it does have a quantity. So when NFTs started coming out, I was like, how could anyone use that? Like it doesn't even make sense. So you're saying you're imposing a scarcity again without a quantity. So you don't have an amount of something, and yet you're saying you don't have enough of it. That's what an NFT is. That's the promise of an NFT. It just sort of like linguistically doesn't make sense. It's almost metaphysical in a way that it's all, I could just I don't know. I can't think of anything else that works even remotely similar. But yet it works. People charge money for NFTs and people pay it. And you don't get the NFT, you don't get the file, again, because it's clonable. If one file exists, infinite files exist. A bit is a bit. So what you're paying essentially is for a receipt. You're basically paying to say you bought something. So imagine going to a store and they go, okay, we have unlimited Nike dunks. You can get the newest Nike drop. Everyone gets it. But we only have 20 receipts that show that you proved it, which is maybe some things work like that. A receipt of authenticity or something like that, somewhat. But even that is so much different. It's something that I think when Marx sort of detailed what capitalism was, couldn't imagine. Of course, there was no digital around then. It was hard to imagine this digital world. It was hard to, imagine someone paying for anything digital, like the iTunes store. Or, an application is even kind of a funnier thing to pay for. But this is like unimaginable to anyone. I'm like looking for, I think because the NFTs are sort of so ridiculous and their market is so ridiculous, and the art that comes out of it is so stupid. And then whatever, the whole thing has just been like largely sort of embarrassing, I would say, for the participants. So there's like not a lot of scholarly writing on it, but I would like love to know like a Marxist point of view on this. It's like really incredible. It represents to me like fantasy capitalism, where I think capitalism could go. Like this is, so I was talking about Mackenzie Wark earlier, her work from a few years ago, Capital is Dead, Is This Something Worse? And she's imagining what follows capital, it could be worse, what she says it already has. And she says in extinction, like the end of the world because of global warming, really. But it's like, I think this is like capital is dead, this is something worse. Like, in the future you may, I don't know, somehow you might like, food might somehow operate this way. I don't know. It's really, I hate to say exciting because it's not, but it's just, it's so insane that it keeps me up at night sometimes, I won't lie. Twisting the foundation of the world in order to create more wealth for the ruling classes is the goal of every right-wing operation. The goal of those that believe society should be oligarchies, as Peter Thiel does, is to extract wealth from anywhere possible, and it is better if it can be extracted from places it does not even exist. Such as the fictional scarce digital file. The NFT represents the ultimate pledge, a step to a world controlled utterly and completely by the ruling class. That is to say, the ultimate reactionary pledge. And I really see it that way. I see NFTs as really sort of a sign that says, value shouldn't have anything to do with the natural world. Value should just be totally determined by the people in power. Let's just give it over completely. And so with that, before we take our next break, I would like to perform some of my own magic within the framework of liberation rather than repression and reactionaryism. So I'm going to make a fungible token out of this lecture, and anyone who wants to receive it, it passes through a protocol called, that shall not be named. But I'm the only one who knows the protocol, so if you want to receive it, I'm going to stand right there, and you just come up and I'll give it to you. And you can sell it or reproduce it infinitely. You can do whatever you want with it once it's transferred to you. Nobody wants it? This might be worth a lot of money someday. Selection's yours. And you can give it to anyone. You know the protocol. That's all you have to say. So she can give it to you. It's a limited edition of how many people are in this room. And any room you step into, it becomes limited to the amount of people in that room also. So yeah. But again, it's limited, so. And if you're outside, you can't transfer it, so sorry. Because that's, like, if you're outside, you're in a room with, like, pretty much everyone in the world. So that's too much. Too decentralized, exactly, for this. So I'll say one last thing, and we'll take a break, and then I'll move on to the AI portion, which will be much shorter. So, I mean, again, like I just said, I largely the NFT thing seems to be mostly pretty like an embarrassment. Though a lot of people have made a lot of money on it. Like it's worked out well. I mean, I think, I don't keep up with it, but there's like reputable galleries have done NFTs and done well, and whatever, they've moved through the world, and you could say like, okay, well, what's really the harm of, the white supremacists and the rewrite? They already have Joe Rogan podcasts and Jordan Peterson and the Stormfront website. Who cares if they have another place to congregate? But I would argue that Bitcoin or blockchain has had real vast repercussions. One is that some of the earliest investors in Bitcoin were prominent white supremacists, and including the domestic abuser Richard Spencer, who said early on in blockchain, in the nascent days of Bitcoin, that Bitcoin is the currency of the alt-right. Stefan Molyneux, not sure how to pronounce his name, who's another prominent white supremacist, started investing in Bitcoin in 2013. Bitcoin.com calls him a philosopher and praises him for getting banned for social media for peddling hate speech. So they're all millionaires now. I don't know if Richard Spencer is because of some legal things, but there's many. Stefan Molyneux definitely is. Because they invested earlier in blockchain. So now we have these super hateful militia type groups who now have funding, and a lot of it. And through the pandemic, when Bitcoin really spiked, they all got a lot richer. This is sort of more conspiratorially minded and editorial, so I apologize. But there was talk of people flying into the January 6th riots on private planes, and a lot of people sort of went on the Capitol en masse, organized with lots of money. Some of them had personal funds, yes, but I would really hard pressed to imagine some of that money didn't come from blockchain. The Southern Poverty Law Center has done a lot of research into this and projects where they've published white supremacist Bitcoin, their wallet numbers, so you can see the transactions that white supremacists made, and they've done some research into the fact that part of the Unite the Right rally was funded by Bitcoin, where someone was murdered. So it's that's also like that's enough in my mind. You know what I mean? That's enough for this to be like, this shouldn't exist. El Salvador has a rewrite president. And he tried to make Bitcoin the official currency, and it was didn't work at all, of course, because it was a terrible idea. It was devastating to the economy, and they're defaulting on loans. The World Bank, and not that I think the World Bank makes great decisions or is making decisions in, has El Salvador's best interest at heart, but but refused to back a lot of give economic relief partially for these reasons, and they're defaulting on loans, and I don't want to say it's just Bitcoin, but they're in a dire economic state in which people are starving to, in part because of Bitcoin. And I'm being somewhat, I would say, generous to how much blame I'm putting on Bitcoin. There's economists who have said it's largely because of Bitcoin. Let's see, whatever horrible shit do I have? And then, yeah, the human trafficking, which is like, I don't want to get too into carcerality and the language around human trafficking. But there's reports from law enforcement agencies who, again, I don't want to say that I like them, and nonprofit groups. There's an arguably it made human trafficking for a period a lot easier. Which is just totally horrifying. So to me, it's not just like, oh, we have NFTs with this like fantastical capitalism where it's something ridiculous. Like lives have been lost. It's like really brutal, and I haven't seen the whenever this is brought up in any sort of blockchain context, they all deny any sort of responsibility or accountability. I haven't seen like a fund put together by the blockchain community where they say we're going to give money to the young woman who was murdered at the Unite the Right rally. Nothing like that. So I think the consequences, while not the biggest in the world, they're horrifying, and that's not, and not to mention the environmental impact that all the electricity generated from Bitcoin mining has done, which is also bad. So yeah, God, I hate to leave it on such a bleak note. I'll leave it on a note of sort of some optimism. So another person, sorry, I forgot to mention her at the beginning, who, if anyone's seen Web3 is going just fine. I'm looking for a fucking name. Her first name's Emily. Anyways, I'm so sorry. I gotta give her credit because she was a big help in this. Not personally, I just like read her stuff. Molly White, who's a software engineer who does, yes, the blog. Web3 is going just fine. So she's also an active Wikipedia editor, large editor of Wikipedia, which is like the fucking Lord's work. Like I love Wikipedia, and it's incredible to edit it. And she's done a lot of editing on right-wing pages to try to make sure they're accurate. And her work is just great. But she has a lot of sway in the Wikipedia community, which is, I think, one of the most well-respected communities on the web. I think it's really a great community, and they really, they don't do everything right, and I have criticisms of Wikipedia, but I think they do a lot great, and they really try. But she petitioned Wikipedia to stop accepting donations in cryptocurrency, and also led a group of technologists, wrote a letter to the U.S. Senate, to Congress, urging them to put in place some sort of regulation around crypto and Bitcoin. So anyway, she successfully lobbied Wikipedia, which I think, so they no longer take donations in crypto because she says blockchain is as she put it, irresponsible technology. So I just want to read a bit of this letter they wrote, which I think is great. Today we write to you urging you to take a critical, skeptical approach towards industry claims that crypto assets, sometimes called cryptocurrencies, crypto tokens, or Web3, are an innovative technology that is unreservedly good. We urge you to resist pressure from digital asset industries, financiers, lobbyists, and boosters to create a regulatory safe haven for these risky, flawed, and unproven digital financial instruments, and to instead take an approach that protects the public interest and ensures technology is deployed in genuine service to the needs of ordinary citizens. All right, now it's time for the flavor. There's a quote I forgot to read that I like a lot from Mackenzie Wark, Hacker Manifesto. The gift as a qualitative exchange creates singular producers, and production is singularity. The gift expresses the virtuality of the production of production, whereas commodified property represents the producer as an object, a quantifiable commodity like any other, or relative value only. So in commodified property, the producer also becomes commodity. The gift of information needs not give rise to conflict over information as property, for information needs not suffer the artifice of scarcity. So even in this, harsh critique of capitalism, work again is like information does not suffer the artifice of scarcity, which I think it's also an interesting use of term, which I wanted to say earlier, artifice of scarcity. Scarcity is always synthetic. I don't want to say NFT is the only place where there's false scarcity. It's just the only place I know of where you can say there's not enough of something when there's no quantity to what that thing is. If there's 10 apples and 11 people, there's not enough. But if there's infinite of something, how can you say there's not enough? Or it's limited. And so it's just interesting to me that even the most cynical people about capitalism and digital capitalism can't even imagine the NFT, cannot predict it. Okay, so switching over to large language models. So this is the calculator locution part. How do calculators speak? So a computer essentially, I would say, is something that can do calculations but do it in steps. So you can give it a number of instructions and you can change its control flow. So given the output of one step of the function, it can do... It's getting rowdy. Yeah, it is getting late. This talk really needs to end. Okay, so I mean, a computer is always sort of a calculator, and so I wanted to talk to this large language model system, ChatGPT, like a calculator. I'll say more about what large language models are in a second. What is 2 plus 10? 12. How did you know that? That's simple arithmetic. 2 plus 10 equals 12. So it claims that it knows how to do that. All right, then I ask it to add this bigger number. The number you're trying to add is too large to be represented by most computer systems, and the result would be an approximation. But with the limitations of what most programming languages, the result of operation would typically be displayed as infinity overflow, which is completely incorrect. I ran this in Python, and it gave me an answer. I sort of, for screen economy reasons, it's hard to show you, but please believe me that I ran it in Python, which is one of the most popular programming languages, so to say most is really ridiculous. All right, so part of the reason was this is a floating point number, the decimal. So then I said, all right, bud, ChatGPT, add these ones with no floating point with them. Gives me the same thing, which is, again, wrong. Give it some simpler ones, gets there. All right, let's go back to this. Okay, wrong again. All right, so if it would be approximated, give me an approximation. This would be the approximation. Again, I ran it in Python, so I knew the answer. That isn't right. My apologies. It knows it got it wrong, which is kind of cool to have an AI that apologizes when it messes up, but ostensibly it shouldn't mess up. That isn't right. Oh, okay, that was fun. I asked it to make simple HTML for a fun homepage. Okay, that isn't right. My apologies. The correct approximation is 2.57 trillion, which is right. So I was confused. I was like, why? Okay, what if I tell it isn't right? It doesn't have very high standards for its work, because, okay, I'm sorry, the exact sum of the two numbers is not representable in most computer systems and result in a very large number. Yeah, I know it result in a large number. The number would have approximately 38 digits, which that was wrong. So this is correct, but it actually had, I guess, it had 36 digits, so 36 is approximately 38, so we'll give it a pass. But so what was interesting to me about this experience is that, like, the point of a computer is a calculator, and now we've created computers that can't do calculations. Everything on the lowest level of a computer is represented in binary, and the easiest way to understand binary is as a number. Binaries really are, binary at its core is a number. So we have decimal representation, the numerals 0 through 9. In binary, we just have two symbols, 0 and 1. But they still represent the exact same system. the real numbers. Of course, you can represent irrational numbers with decimal, but you can't do that with binary. So there's a slight difference, but they're very similar. They're ways of dealing with numbers. So what was interesting about this to me was that sort of in some insane circumvention, we've gotten to the point where our calculators can't calculate. And its ability to sort of play this game with me, converse with me in this way where it goes, I'm sorry, it's wrong, is hailed as revolutionary. This is seen as something that's going to change everything. I saw some stupid article. I work as a software engineer, and a damn good one, right, Darren? Thank you. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Just a client, yeah. But anyhow, and I read an article that was like, coding will be over in 5 years, which is moronic, but it's supposed to change industry, change everything, and it can't add two numbers together well. So I'm trying to get my thing back here. Will this work? Yeah. Okay. So this is an example of a large language model, which is a specific kind of model working within the paradigm of what is termed machine learning. Machine learning is a popular buzzword everywhere now, I guess I would say. So large language models, essentially what they do is they just take huge swaths of text and they go over them until they know how to give the correct next word in the series. There's a lot of sort of complicated math involved that, again, I would say is not relevant to machine learning. But essentially, it just takes a lot of text, and given this text, it figures out what is a good next fit, what the good next word is. So it knows apologies would be a proper next word. So all the large language model really does, it prizes intelligibility. That's all it really wants to do, is generate an intelligible sentence. So, recently we've been hearing a lot about this AI revolution. When AI is like in our lives all the time and we don't think about it, which is really weird. So for instance, I was looking at a picture on my phone and like I clicked it and somehow it edited out like the background of the picture, and it was a picture of me and another person, and it just like took me and the other person. That's a use of AI. Like that's AI. I was watching a TV show. The guy was like doing voice to text. That's also AI working. It works in all these sort of small ways. But so the best applications the most meaningful applications have been sort of small and not that revolutionary. And sort of what they do is push us further into the digital. They just get us more sort of hooked on things we're already hooked on. So I don't think they represent any super meaningful change. I don't think they'll revolutionize anything. People have talked about getting towards a general AI, which is essentially an AI that you can say like, I need architecture plans to it, and it'll make, it'll make a building, or it'll come up with its own commands. It'll know, something. It'll think in some sort of general way. So I'm sorry, but I have to quote Wittgenstein. It's like, this quote is just too fucking good. But so Wittgenstein, in the Philosophical Investigation, said, if a lion could speak, what would it say? Essentially meaning that a lion's experience is so different from humans, and that language is inherently something, language is our way of describing our world, and the world of a lion is so different. It sees differently, it eats differently, everything is different for a lion. It couldn't speak in our language. So, if a computer could speak, what could it say? It's just piles of silicon and transistors built up in digital logic circuits. It has nothing to think about. Its experience is so different. It doesn't even really have experience. It doesn't have neurons. So why are we told again and again there's an AI revolution happening, which, this AI revolution, which again, we've had these things for years in our phone. I've been amazed at, when you're texting and it comes up with a suggested word, or autocorrect. Spell check I wouldn't say is AI, but when it predicts the next word, it's exactly what this is doing. It's a large language model, except it's trained on your text data more prominently than other language. But anyways, that's a use of AI that's been around for a long time. So why is the AI revolutioning, and that we interact with all the time? It's like a constant interface with AI. So why are we told it's happening when it doesn't do anything super meaningful. The best application of ChatGPT I've seen is it's probably pretty helpful in writing like helping you cheat on college essays. So probably they'll be like, I'm an NYU student. I walk around the library and people have ChatGPT up and they copy. I've watched their screens. I'm sorry. They'll sort of copy and paste and then edit the parts because it can't be guaranteed to get things right. It might get things wrong, as you know, we've seen it. It doesn't guarantee accuracy. It guarantees intelligibility. And so they'll sort of edit it. So, I mean, that's good. Like, probably college students will be like way worse at writing now, a lot of them. So that seems like a win for AI. So the stuff that like doesn't have a ton of great uses, some of them are fun, some of them are useful, is revolutionary. Why? Well, it's kind of funny to me, funny timing that in sort of the shadow of the blockchain revolution failing, Web3 is going to come, it's going to change everything. And then almost overnight, it was like, blockchain is dead, like, you know, it crashed. And then there was I can't remember that, that's another thing I didn't say with the problem with cryptocurrencies. Like a lot of people have been just like invested in it and then been duped really badly. So there's a lot of people who've lost a lot of money with whatever that guy on the island, I can't remember his name. Everyone knows what I'm talking about. When his crypto exchange crashed because it was a Ponzi scheme. Sam what? Sam Bankman-Fried, yes, exactly. So when that happened, suddenly there was like a hard pivot from we're going to have Web3 to we're going to have general AI. Wow, it's so similar. Web3, we have this messianic age promised to us of Web3, and then we have a new messianic age promised to us of general AI. No one has any clue how we get there. There's, again, I said I'm an NYU student, so I've been fortunate because the debate is playing out, I would say. The debate over AI has been playing out over the last, I would say, 20 years between a lot of different people, but two of the prominent people are at NYU. Jan LeCun and Ernst Davis, who Ernst Davis is a credible computer scientist, and Jan LeCun, I mean, won the Turing Award, so he's an incredible computer scientist, but very, very destructive. He's the head of AI research at Meta, so he's bad. But you know, he coined the term deep learning, and anyhow, so. They're in this epic war between each other about how do we get to general AI? What are we going to get to general AI? And you know, each of them thinks they has the answer, but neither of them really say what general AI is. And this isn't like idiots on Joe Rogan. This is like prominent computer scientists. They don't have a good definition of what it is, and neither of them have a good vision of how we get there. Jan LeCun wants to say, I have a great vision of how we get there. We're going to do deep learning. Deep learning is not working out that well. We're going to do energy-based models, which is this new kind of machine learning. You'll see it in the New York Times in like a year. And that's going to get us to general AI, but we don't get any closer. We're not getting closer to it. We're just not. Again, an example that Ernest Davis likes to bring up of the failure of machine learning is that, you know, you can make a robot that opens a doorknob, but if the doorknob's painted black, it can't identify it as a doorknob. So it's pretty far from general AI. So we're given the same promise, and why? Why so quickly? Is really the questions I started wondering. Why was there pivot? Well, one is economic. You know, Silicon Valley and big tech are really out of ideas. Most of their money comes from advertising, which is a bad thing to stake. The entire economy, you know, not the entire, but a large part of the economy is wrapped up in these companies. Meta just had to lay off 10,000 workers. And Google had huge, you know, we've been hearing about these layoffs. They're out of ideas and they're out of ways to generate new revenue, but they sort of believed in themselves so much that they said, let's just get bigger and bigger and bigger. Well, we're going to come up with the next big idea. Let it, you know, if it's blockchain, if it's AI, we're going to come up with it eventually. We're going to get to this messianic age where all this growth is valued. So they have to come up with something new. But they can't do it because there's almost nothing new. I would argue, and not going to make the talk go longer, we're at the end of technology. We've completely mastered our senses in this way. You know, the pandemic showed us we could talk to someone totally, you know, on the other side of the planet instantly, like completely visually. Of course, these things are horrible and no one wants to do them because ultimately, like, we don't need that much technology. We're overdosed on technology. It makes us feel alienated. We don't really like it. And and we have so much of it that we don't have to, that we almost subjugate our senses. We almost put them secondary to technology. I mean, just as an example, I've seen it very common that people just walk around now with their earbuds in, going about their daily life. It's and everyone looks at their phone constantly, including me. We've become cyborgs. I think it's just like that's just a fact. And so, in addition to our addiction to technology, we've become addicted to the cycles of technology, to the revolutions of technology. Cycles is the wrong word. To the idea that a new technology is going to come and change everything, that is going to change the world. And the reason we're addicted to it is because we've experienced it. So, I mean, the tele-revolution of the 20th century, television, telephone, which you could argue the information age, the revolution we're in now, it grows out of. But I think it's like 3 seismic shifts that are all what I like to call a Gutenberg. So there's the Gutenberg printing press, which was the first great media revolution and changed the entire world, changed everything, changed perception, changed the way people remembered things, changed the way the people thought about knowledge, changed the human experience. So I think we've experienced 3 of those in the last about 100 years. There's, the tele-revolution, the information age of the late 20th century, and then the mobile revolution, where all of the information and telephonics combined and became portable. You could argue that's one part of one continuum of a Gutenberg. There's been one Gutenberg, but it doesn't really matter. The difference is we've changed it. And my experience of that is that's been like exhilarating and scary and bizarre, and it's been a high. It's been a rush. And I think there's something to this narrative that something's going to come and change everything that is enticing and addicting and is something like a high. And the reason is because we've experienced it. That experience is so profound that, the way you relate to yourself as a human and the way everyone relates to themselves as a person and relates to the world has changed in our lifetime, inarguably. The mobile internet revolution is greater than the printing press. And that's something that affects us personally and affects us on an individual level. We don't talk about that. We don't care to talk about that. We just kind of keep going. We just keep moving because that's, all capital knows how to do is perpetuate itself. We don't take time for the human side of technology and how it affects us, but it does. And I think it's scary and alienating, but it's also thrilling, which is, I don't want to go too personal, but whatever, like I'm a recovering addict. And so like, I know the thrill of doing something that is bad for you, that makes you feel bad for yourself, that makes you feel anxious and alienated, and then wanting to do it again, wanting to have more of it, because partly it's because the thrill is just too good to ignore. And eventually there's no thrill, but you just keep doing it. And it's, the consequences of blockchain, of like, these, it not working out at all, despite, Bitcoin started in 2009, so we're going on 14 years of this shit, despite it never working out, failing at every step, from Mt. Gox to the Sam Bankman-Fried to all this shit that's just never worked, that like we sort of don't care. We want to sign up for round 2 because it's just too exciting and too exhilarating. And despite even early things that it's, and these are sort of funny examples, but there's also, the example I talked about at the beginning of the talk, where like AI software, constantly recognizes people with can't recognize people with darker skin. That's a common thing. And then also with algorithmic policing, labels people with darker skin, or specifically black people, as criminals. So, it's the same bullshit masked in a different thing, but we sign up for it and we want, like, police don't need technology to be racist. Like, they know how to be racist. They don't need any help, And I have a programming, we have computers for addition. I don't need this help. We don't need most of this, but we keep signing up for it because it's just too exhilarating. And earlier today, when I was coming up with this, trying to end on a somewhat positive note, I like the term for this kind of high as Gutenberg delirium. is the sensation of living through a Gutenberg. Um, and so, peace. This is the last bit. Yeah, no problem. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think all we're left in the face of these things is the possibility of another high of Gutenberg delirium. And I don't really want to end with a solution or what I think we should do. Just kind of examine that sensation and a request of anyone listening to just, examine if they've had these feelings. Because I think when I ask myself how I've dealt with these revolutions in my lifetime, all these things come up, and I haven't processed them because they're so ubiquitous. It's hard to talk in therapy about, like, my mom knows what a selfie is now. I take selfies all the time. It's so bizarre, like, but it's happening, and I think it's going to keep happening because capital is out of ideas, big tech is out of ideas, and we're desperate. So I hate to be so glum, but because I think there's a lot to be exciting about. But thanks all for sticking with this talk.